now I need to kind of lie in the bed that I've made and figure out what I'm doing. Hi, hello, my name is Allie, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, what it's costing me, and particularly today, what it's costing me, because I went to a yarn festival. So we will get into that today, also do some whipped updates, all the usual. But thank you so much for being here. And I'm coming to you today from just outside Toronto with my tulip mug because it is spring and I am obsessed with tulips and 'tis the season. Today in my tulip mug, I'm actually branching out. I'm not drinking my usual Sloan Classic Earl Grey. So let's be clear, I'm not branching out like dramatically because am I still drinking an Earl Grey? But this time I'm drinking Earl Grey from Social Coffee and Tea Co., which is based here in Canada. The shop is in Richmond Hill, which is pretty close to Toronto, and it's delicious. Like, has it unseated Sloan Classic as my go-to? No, nothing will ever dethrone Sloan. Dethrone Sloan, I feel like I could only say that so many times before it becomes a tongue twister. But as far as introducing variety once in a while to not become like numb, I guess, to the like nuances of it, this, I'm a tea nerd. Having different ones once in a while makes you then sort of newly aware of the characteristics of the ones that you drink all the time also. So I think that it's really fun to switch it up. And this one is like, I'm trying to figure out how to explain how it's different from Sloan and what I like about it. I'm not enough of a tea nerd to be able to do that successfully. What I feel like I can say is that I feel like to me, the difference between a really good Earl Grey and like a not very good, probably like cheapy grocery store Earl Grey is that, so like the thing that makes a tea Earl Grey is the bergamot. Like, it's a black tea, but with bergamot flavor added, which I actually learned recently, was originally just a preservation technique. It was like a way to like keep tea from molding, like as it was being shipped overseas. And then it just like happened that it tasted really good. But so I find what makes the biggest difference in a tea is just whether like the flavors kind of just all like muddle together, or if there's kind of like a crisp like delineation of the bergamot. Am I making any sense? I feel like in a good Earl Grey, the bergamot kind of like sits above everything else as this like crisp little like accent layer on top of it. Did that mean anything? If it did, great, thank you for generously interpreting that. If it didn't, I'm sorry. Anyway, it's real good. Okay, so today what I'm wearing is my Sunny top by Trust the Mojo, which unfortunately this is like really not a size inclusive pattern, which I didn't realize. I knit this kind of before I was like clued into this issue. So it actually only goes up to a 47-inch bust, which like we don't love to see. So I knit this last year from the end of April to the end of May, and I knit a size small, and the pattern also comes with I think 3 different lengths that you can knit it to, like a crop, a like sort of semi crop, and then like a full length. And I knit like allegedly the full length, but it is very much still kind of like, it's like an awkward like, because on me it hits at this really weird point where it's like it's past my waist, so it's not cutting there, it's like continuing down onto my hips, but not enough to then like follow that curve. Instead it just kind of like flares out awkwardly at the bottom where like it just starts to go up from my waist. It's just a weird spot, so I have to wear it tucked in. And this top is knit bottom up, so there wasn't really like a great way to fix that, but it is cute in the right circumstances. And also to discuss the numbers on this one. So like I said, I finished this at the end of last May, which is almost exactly an entire year ago. And in that time, I've worn it 7 times, which like I feel like is not terrible for a garment that was like away in a bin in my basement for most of the year because it wasn't like weather appropriate. Though like maybe I should keep it out and try to like layer it in colder weather. I don't know. I don't have like a great like top layer collection. Maybe I need to knit more cardigans. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe then I would wear this more. But it has a fantastic cost per wear because I knit it entirely out of stash yarn that was left over from my squiggle sweater, which I bought entirely too much red for. So I paid $0 for yarn, though if I had bought it just for this project, it was 2 skeins of Cascade 220, so $18. And based on that, that would make my cost per wear $2.57, which is not where I'd love to see it end up, but after one season, that's decent. So before I get into my whip updates, like I mentioned, I went to a yarn festival yesterday. Yesterday was Knit City Toronto, and this is the first yarn festival that I've ever gone to. So that was definitely like a fun new thing. And we'll be discussing it more around the acquisitions section. So you see where this is going. Oh no, I was about to try this on and realized that I'm still in the middle of a row, which means that I can't try it on. And not only am I in the middle of a row, I am at the end of my merino strand, which is obviously why I put it down, because I was feeling too lazy to join a new ball. So I guess we're doing this right now. Okay, so as I finish up the ribbing on this edge, This is gonna be a really short update because basically all that's happened is I'm just still knitting a really long cardigan and it doesn't look a whole lot different from the last time that you saw it. And there, okay. So if you are new, this is my No Frills Cardigan by Petite Knit that I have been working on since January. And if that sounds like a long time, it is. And it's because it's also a very long sweater. This is a top-down raglan style cardigan in plain stockinette, and you knit the button-free button band at the same time, so you don't have to go and do that after, which is really nice. This pattern is size inclusive up to a 59-inch bust, which is pretty good. Would love to see it pushed a bit further, but we are well ahead of the sunny top. I'm knitting the size extra small, and for a brief materials recap, I'm using the Knitting for Olive Merino in mustard, and also the We Are Knitters Touch Me Mohair in also the color mustard. So in the interest of numbers, I spent about $130 Canadian on the merino and about $100 on the mohair, so $230 total, plus about $10 for the pattern. $240 Canadian is my cost for this project, which works out to about 175 US. That said, based on my remaining yarn inventory that I did in my last video, I'm gonna have a lot of mohair left over, so it did not need to cost quite this much. I should also mention I'm knitting this on 4.5mm needles rather than the 4mm written in the pattern because I knit tight. So like I said, there's not a whole lot to tell you on this. Like I'm just still knitting stockinette. Let me find my progress keeper. So there's 2 stitch markers here. This top one is where I was the last time that I filmed. So it's been 2 weeks. I've done a little bit, haven't done a lot. Also, it takes forever to do a row on this and half of it's purling. So it takes how long it takes. But I feel like last time I tried this on, it still needed quite a bit more than this for it to be ready to start like getting ready to bind off. So we're just still carrying on. We're just still knitting. I also still need to knit pockets every single time I record. I'm like, maybe next time I'll have done the pockets. I still have not done the pockets. I'm just like really avoiding having to do the part where I like measure out where the pockets need to start. I just don't think I will enjoy that. So I'm avoiding it for now. So I think what's gonna happen is I'm just going to avoid it until it's the only thing left keeping me from having the sweater finished. And then I will have no choice and I'll be motivated to do it because I will want it finished. So I think that's when pockets are gonna happen. Okay, now that I've finished that row, let me try this on. Can I get all of me in frame? So, very long, not long enough. We've still got to knit more. I feel like somehow the bottom little bit of this cardigan is like taking longer than the entire like top 80% of the cardigan. I don't know. It just feels like I'm never getting any closer to done. Someday I will appear on the channel and show you this finished cardigan. But that day is not today. Look how cute it is though. Like if we look at it from the front, if I like straighten out the button band, which I'm hoping that when this is done and not on the needles, that this will be better at sitting flat. It kind of has a tendency to like end up with the band tucked in like that, which like I don't love. So hopefully that kind of like figures itself out. I'm still not sure if I'm gonna decide that these sleeves are too long. I think I will probably just wear it for a while and see how much it bugs me, because like if I let them fully fall, like they do entirely cover my thumb right now. And I do love a long sleeve, but that might be slightly too long. I should not have bound off the sleeve before I blocked it. That was a mistake, but maybe it'll be fine. Cut to me like 3 months from now being like, it was not fun, I have to go fix this now. But what can you do? Look at it though, isn't it like so beautiful? It's also a very nice like mid-weight fabric. Like I could totally see myself wearing this on like a summer evening, or even just like I was gonna say taking it along in the summer when you think you might be going somewhere with like cold air conditioning. And then I remember this is the largest sweater of life, so it's probably not really going to be my like purse sweater. It'll have a purpose. It will. Mostly just being stunning. Like look at it in this color. Like I just love the idea of having this giant statement sweater in this really fun color. Big fan. Okay, now unfortunately for me, we're still in the whip section, which I say because last time I told you that if I did not have my dog walking gloves finished, that I need you to publicly shame me. And I'm here to report that they're not finished, but let me make my excuses. Here's what happened. So last time I was saying that due to a yarn shortage issue, I ended up knitting the second one shorter than the first one and was planning to go back and chop a couple inches off the bottom of the first one. They were knit bottom up, so this would mean having to do some surgery. And I successfully removed a little bit from the bottom. This is the like remaining cuff that I chopped off, but I don't understand what's happened. And I only do not have these done because my options were either bind it off looking weird because I didn't understand what was happening, or come to you for help. So I have chosen to humble myself. I have chosen to come here, hoping that one of you knows what is going on, because I do not. We have like a giant tangle of tried on tubing and needles and what is going on. Okay, so this is the second one that I made. So this is the shorter length. This is the length it's supposed to be. And I still need to knit the thumb on this, which is only not done because I was going to do that right after I did the bind off on the other one, so that I would be doing all of my tubular bind off together, so I wouldn't have to like look up the video again. I remember 98% of how to do a tubular bind off from the top of my head, but I'm never quite sure about like the very first, because you kind of, what I think of as the first step of like the repeating process that you do is not the first step when you're first starting. It's like the second or third step or something. And so I can never quite remember where to start. So I'm like, I'm just gonna do it all when I'm doing it all together and I don't have to look it up again. But, so this is the one that I chopped the bottom off of, which that went fine. I knew that picking up ribbing for a lifeline is tougher than doing it in stockinette. I've never done a lifeline in ribbing before, but I was like, okay, well, worst case scenario, like this is really bulky yarn. It's also pretty sticky yarn. Like I can probably just, like there aren't that many stitches. I can probably just pick up the knit ones and then like just go back and like rescue the purls. Like that's probably fine. But I was having this issue when I was trying to put in the lifeline that like when I flipped it to like look at the inside, I couldn't find the like the knit on the other side that would be the purl. Like I couldn't like see where that stitch was. And then, so I just picked up the knits and was like, okay, great, I'll do that. And then I'll go rescue the purls. But when I tried to do that, I don't see the purl, like I don't see stitches that aren't on the needle, but I only have half as many stitches as I'm supposed to have. Let me see if I can show you. So you can see that all of this is a twisted rib. So all of the twisted knits are picked up on the cord, but like, you can see that it's ribbed, but I don't see like a missing stitch that's not on the needle at any of the purl sections. Where is the purl stitch? Why is it not, if it's not on my cable, why is it not falling down the well? Why is Timmy not in need of rescue? Like where did it go? And I was talking to, shout out to my friend Lauren, who also knits, and she was like, is it just maybe that it's like it's just like such a sticky yarn that the stitches are all dropped and it's just like not super obvious because they're not like falling down on their own? But like I'm looking and I'm like kind of trying to pull it apart the way you would if you were like trying to drop a stitch, and nothing's happening. So where did the stitches go? Where are the purl stitches? And here, my problem is that if I bind off like this, I can't do like a 1x1 tubular bind off because it won't line up, because there's no purls, there's no ribbing. I can't do a ribbed bind off. So I don't know. I kind of tried, actually, you can see on this side, I did try to start binding off, and I was like, what if I try to do, actually, I think this is my second attempt. First, I tried to do a tubular bind off, but to only do it the way that you do it when you're working the knit stitch, not the purl. So I was like, what if I set it up like it's a knit stitch every time? And like, it's possible that there's a version of that does work and I was just doing this wrong. What I was doing wasn't working. So I ripped that out. And then I think I tried just doing a regular bind off. I think that's what I was doing here. But that just looks so different from the tubular. This is a tubular cast on because it's knit up this way, but I was hoping to do a tubular bind off so they would like match. And it really doesn't match. And this is when I was sitting there debating, do I just finish it like this? Like it's gonna be in a coat sleeve anyway, who cares? But I was like, This feels like a time that I should take advantage of the endless knowledge of the YouTube community to try to learn something and improve my knitting skill set, even though I was feeling really impatient and just wanted to finish these. Like I had decided I had like a few hours after work that day and I was like, I am going to finish these gloves today. And I was really unimpressed when that was not happening. So please tell me if you have any idea what's going on. I'll try to show. So here's the outside edge that I'm working from. This is the right side. And if I slowly flip it, like I don't understand. Like if I try to follow, here's a knit stitch on this side, and I follow it around, it's like it's just into the knit stitch on this side, except that the knit stitches are upside down on this side. Like I don't know. In my head, I should be able to look at a purl on this side and flip it inside out and be like, there's the knit and there's the stitch for it. But no, there's just not a stitch. Send help. Oh, I guess I also need to tell you what this pattern is. That would be very helpful, wouldn't it? So this is sort of a very self-modified pattern. If you didn't catch me talking about this last time, these are me solving a very specific problem, which is that I live in a place that gets very cold in the winter. I, as a person, get cold extremely easily. And I also have a very cute dog who is a little bit high maintenance, and I need to be able to access treats while I'm walking him. So I need dexterity. And I also need my fingers to not feel like they're going to fall off of my hand. So my goal with these was to create the perfect dog walking gloves, which means that I made this super weird little convertible glove situation so that I have my treat fingers and the rest of them don't have to be cold just because I need these ones. So I used as my basis for this is not part of a pattern. I made this up. I used as the basis for this the bridge arm warmers by Kukiko Inoue. I modified it a little bit by shortening this part, and then I also knit this part a little bit longer because I wanted to really get like maximum finger warmth out of it. And on the other one, I did knit the thumb a little bit longer as well, just to, again, maximum warmth. This is a free pattern, by the way. It only comes in one size. It's really simple and easy to follow. Because it's bulky, it knits up so fast. Like I did the vast majority of this in one sitting. And yet I've been working on these since the 5th of April because when I first cast on, we were still having like the odd really cold day where I could have worn these. So I felt motivated. And then it promptly was like, it is spring now. So, you know, the motivation kind of went, but now I really want to finish these because I want them to be like ready for the fall. I don't want the first cold day to hit and to be like, oh, I wish I had those. I should finish them now. So hopefully with a little bit of guidance on what is happening with my picked up stitches, these will be done the next time. I've learned better than to commit to this on YouTube now. I'm also knitting this out of my souvenir yarn that I picked up on my trip to Venice in March. So this is the Cessia Ulisse yarn, which I picked up from the local yarn shop in Venice called Lellabella. And it's this really beautiful sort of speckly, when the yarn is, actually I can show you in some of the ends here where it's sort of starting to come apart. It's actually just these two different colors spun together, but the lighter color is really sort of wrapped in the darker color, so it only kind of shows through as these occasional flecks. Really, really nice. It's 100% wool and it is this really bulky weight, so I'm so excited for how warm these are going to be when I finally finish them. In terms of cost, I think I spent about $40 Canadian on the yarn. I'm not exactly sure. I couldn't find my receipt for it once I got home, but based on the fact that I foresee myself wearing these like basically every day that I'm walking my dog in the fall and winter, I think that cost per wear is going to become really good really fast. Also noteworthy is that I'm knitting these on a 5.5mm needle instead of the 6mm needle written in the pattern, which is giving me closer to the accurate gauge and like a really nice, like cozily dense kind of fabric. Okay, it's time to talk about Knit City Toronto. So this was my first time ever going to any kind of yarn festival, so I really did not know like what to expect. I knew that there would be yarn vendors, but that was kind of it. Also, I think the only like videos that I watched about other yarn festivals were about, what was it called? Woolen Folk, the one that was basically like the Fire Fest of the yarn festival world. So, you know, that's not like a very helpful picture. So, you know, was hoping it wasn't gonna be like that. Other than that, I didn't have a whole lot of an idea. So I was kind of going into it ready to be surprised. I did go in with a little bit of research because, as I've talked about before on this channel, I don't want to have like a big yarn stash. I like to kind of buy things specifically for projects because I feel like otherwise, just knowing myself, I just feel like I just will not get to that yarn. Like, I'm very similar with my book buying. I'm usually much more excited to read something, to knit with something, because it's just arrived and I got it just for this, and now it's time to do this thing. And the longer something kind of languishes on a shelf, the less excited I am to use it. So I didn't want to buy a lot in general, because I didn't want to create like a big like projects and projects long queue of things that I've now like decided that I'm working on, and in that way it then becomes like an assignment rather than just something I'm deciding I want to cast this thing on next, and so let me get what I need for that. So I was trying to avoid creating a really long queue for myself, and also trying to avoid buying things that I don't know what I'm gonna use them for, because, you know, the one skein of beautiful hedgehog fibers that I bought months ago still hasn't been used for anything, and I still am like waffling between different things that I could use it for. So this is just not the best way for me to buy things. So I tried to do a bit of pattern research before I went, just to look at, okay, what are some patterns that I might like to do that would be well suited to the type of yarn that I want to buy at the yarn festival? Because for me, there's kind of a couple different main considerations here. One is that personally, superwash is not my favorite, and a lot of the kind of yarn at a yarn festival with a lot of indie dyers is superwash. That seems to be the most popular for wool bases for indie dyers, and it's just not my personal favorite. So knowing that, I had the thought going in that mohair was probably going to be the thing that would make the most sense for me to look at, because that's also very popular with indie dyers, and it's not superwash. And I was thinking that it could be a really fun summer knit project to do something that's very sort of like open gauge and flowy, that would be really good for kind of summery days, but like when you're probably going to be in some like chilly air conditioning, maybe even as a purse layer where it would work better than the giant cardigan. Just something that is very light and airy, and also likely to knit up quite quickly and just be like a really fun project in that way. So I was thinking about that going in, and I pulled a couple of projects from Ravelry that I thought I might want to do that sort of fit into that category, so that I would have some yardage numbers to work off of, so I knew like how many skeins do I need to buy if I'm buying something and I want to make one of these. Copper is now like just out of frame here, needing pets, so if my arm is back here, that's why. And then the other consideration that I had in mind in doing this pattern research beforehand was that I wanted to look for patterns that would be well suited to variegated yarns, because I don't know, I've yet to get on board for solid color hand-dyed yarn. Like for me, just as a buyer, I can't quite justify like the difference there. Where like I value the work of like an independent artisan for sure over something that's like produced on a mass scale in like an industrial kind of environment, but the price difference is just so vast that like it is still important to me to buy from yarn companies that are using traceable supply, that we know that it's being manufactured in ethical conditions. Like that is important to me. So I will pay for the price difference between that and like the cheapest yarn at a big box craft store, where all of those things are like big question marks. But I've not yet been able to justify the price difference between this and solid colors from indie dyers. So for me, the real value in hand-dyed yarn is the fun variegated colors. So I was specifically thinking about that when I was looking at projects that I wanted to shop for. But that said, there were a few solid colors. I was like, ooh, I might in this moment a little bit get it. Because I think that one of the possibilities with hand-dyed solids is just a sort of subtlety in color that you're unlikely to find elsewhere. Just like very particular hues that are maybe not easy to find. There was one I didn't take a picture of this one and I should have, but they had this hue that was this gorgeous, like it was like right on the border between orange and red. And like as someone who loves an orangey red, I was like, I don't feel like I've ever seen yarn in this exact color. And I was tempted by it. I was considering getting it to do sort of like a racerback tank top out of. And basically the only thing that stopped me was that I decided to buy a different yarn for something else instead. And I didn't really want to be adding multiple specific knitting projects to my queue, because like I said, I like to be able to pick based on what I'm excited to knit next, and not just like what me from 2 months ago decided I was going to want to knit. So I didn't, but I did feel a little bit like, okay, in person, where I can really accurately assess the color, because online there's always like a bit of a risk factor. Okay, I see how there are some very particular colors that might call to me from an indie dyer. So I have a little bit more understanding of that now. We're not entirely there yet. I didn't buy it, but the mind is expanding. The bank account might soon be shrinking. So when I first got to the event, it was at the Weston Harbour Castle in Toronto, which is just like a big hotel, and they have a convention center. And it's one of those ones where like it's two buildings that are like across the street from each other, and then there's like a sky bridge that connects them. And the direction I was coming from, you first pass the half that's like, there's like little itty bitty letters that say like convention center, but there's not an entrance that like looks welcoming. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't look like where you'd like enter a conference, like welcome to whatever. Like it just doesn't look like that. And I was like, I mean, this is like the back side. I probably have to go in on the other side. Then you get to the other side, which is like the street that the buildings are on either side of. And like, it didn't really look like a place to go in there either. And there was no signage for like anything to do with Knit City. And I was like, I don't know. And so then I go to the like main like hotel lobby section thinking, oh, there will probably be signage there. And like, again, there was no signage outside there. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go in the lobby. And I go in the lobby, again, expecting to see signage somewhere. Part of this is that I'm a graphic designer for my work, and I've done a lot of conference signage as part of my job. So I am very familiar with what is like often part of event signage. Now, these are not the same. Like I'm usually doing signage for like big conferences where people pay hundreds of dollars to go to them. So that is obviously operating on a very different budget than something that's charging people $20 admission into like a vendor's market, right? So I understand why we didn't have the budget for like exterior window clings that say Knit City this way, but I was kind of confused why I'm like in the hotel lobby and there's like nothing telling me where to go. And so I kind of like pull off to the side with my phone and I'm like pulling back up the website and like, does it like specify where in here? And then I see somewhere it's like, oh, it's in the Metropolitan Ballroom. Okay, great. Click on where that's linked to and it pulls up like, you know, a like outline building map. So I'm like, okay, here's the ballroom, but like now where am I in all of this? And like, okay, then figure out, okay, this is labeled, this is like South Tower, North Tower, okay. And I can see at opposite ends of the lobby, like, but like, this is a very like wide lobby. So like, you really have to kind of like wander to like see these things. But it's like, okay, I found the tower. It turned out I did end up taking the sky bridge. I was going back to the other side of the road. So maybe I could have gone in that way. It just, none of it looked like, here's where you should go to go to this event. So it was a bit of an adventure to get there, but I did get there. Once I was actually like following the path toward the correct tower, then there started being kind of little like poster board easels with like Knit City this way. I just had to get so much closer to it than I expected to start to see things pointing me the right way. We found it in the end. And I really didn't know like what this was going to look like, but it turned out that it felt very much like the One of a Kind show. If you're from around Toronto and you know what that is, a little bit smaller. It was probably like half the size maybe of the One of a Kind show. And if you're not from the Toronto area, just like picture any big like convention center, craft sale, artisan market kind of thing you might go to. And it was basically like that. Just a lot of different booths set up in rows, right? And you can just kind of like weave your way through. And when I just got there, I kind of went all the way to one end so that I could sort of methodically work my way from one end to the other. And at the very first booth that I was looking at, someone was like, "Are you on YouTube? Have I watched you?" And I was like, what? That there is one person here who knows who I am is wild. It also happened that was the only time that this happened. So this was just a very weird like sample of one. The first booth that I was at happened to be the one where I ran into someone who knew me. So shout out to Liz. It was so lovely to meet you. I'm sorry if I seemed awkward or weird because I can be like that, but I had a lovely time meeting you and I hope you had a great rest of your time at the show. Basically my strategy was to like go all the way through and just sort of take notes, take pictures of things that I was kind of thinking about and then would make a decision at the end because again, I didn't want to be forming like a huge queue of projects. So I don't want to commit to like, oh, I think this is the perfect mohair for this mohair thing I thought I might make. And then 2 booths later be like, I actually want to make that with this mohair. Now what am I going to do with the other mohair? So despite all of my pattern research beforehand, did I still end up sitting down on my phone on Ravelry for half an hour before I bought anything? Yes, I still was like, I don't know, I need to check things. I need to look at Ravelry for samples of projects that have been knit up in this yarn to make sure I know what it looks like as a fabric, not just as a skein. There was no avoiding doing that. But I will say that I think me being as picky as I am about variegated yarns really helped me not spend a ton of money at this yarn festival because there's so many skeins of yarn that I think are so beautiful as objects. Like here's one that really stood out to me that I was like, this is beautiful. This is from Rose Hill Yarns. But I just don't think that I would actually want to wear the garment that it would make. Like that just wouldn't be my style. The skein, beautiful. the garment just not for me. And so in a way, looking at the different vendor booths kind of felt to me more like being in an art gallery than going shopping. And like that's pretty accurate. Copper is joining us now to discuss this. And that's actually pretty accurate because like in an art gallery, like often things are for sale, right? But that's not like mostly what most people are there for. Like, you'd have to like really love, like art's not cheap. Like you're not just waltzing into art galleries planning to buy everything, even that you really love. So that was really more how it felt for me. Like most of it, I was just like appreciating it and taking in like eye candy for the whole time. And it was just really beautiful to look at. Another booth that caught my eye was the Green Button Jar, which has an Etsy shop. And they had this like gorgeous turquoisey greeny mohair that I really considered for this like summery garment project. But I ended up deciding against that one because it's just not my favorite color to wear, and I wanted to make sure this would be something that I really like to wear. This is why my entire house is turquoise, because I don't like wearing turquoise, but I love it, so my house is turquoise instead. But one of the things that I really loved about their booth was that they had a lot of colors that fit into what I'm talking about when I'm describing like variegated yarns, but where the variegation is more subtle, like where you're not getting a lot of really strong contrast. That's the kind of variegation that I like. I like a soft green to blue where they're like the exact same darkness like this one. So a lot of theirs appealed to me in that way, and they're definitely one that I'm gonna want to keep an eye on, I think. But after sitting down, doing my Ravelry deliberations, what I ended up coming home with was some mohair from the Wandering Flock, and I actually picked up 2 of these skeins. So this is their mohair silk. It's 80% Super Kid mohair and 20% silk, and this is in the color Cosmic Tie-Dye. And I specifically learned about the Wandering Flock through Aro Knits and Pearls, who uses the Wandering Flock a lot. Like her entire knit collection is just these like gorgeous like pastels, and one of the things that I love about them is that they do tend to be this very cohesive, like overall tonality. Like there's not a lot of light to dark variation. It's more just about the color variation, which is exactly the kind of variegation that I love. So this was a booth that I was really excited to go check out going in. I knew there was a decent chance that would be where I would end up buying from. But I also feel like with this kind of hand-dyed yarn, it's kind of harder to shop for online because like there can be a lot of variation and you don't necessarily know how much there's going to be unless you're really familiar with a particular brand. Like I've seen, skeins of yarn in the same colorway as mine that look radically different from mine. It's like a very different ratio of like color dispersal where like, oh, in my head this yarn is blue, but in this person's project this yarn is purple. And like, of course, both colors are actually in both, but just the overall effect is very different. So in that way, being able to pick variegated yarns in person was really appealing to me also. And I also, at the booth, I got to meet Geraldine, who's the creator of the Wandering Flock, which if you don't know, they're based in Brooklyn. And she was so sweet. She complimented me on my top. I was wearing my poppy top. It was just a lovely interaction. I had a great time in that booth the first time and the second time when I eventually came back to buy this. And one of the things that was nice about their booth is they had quite a few samples to like show what their different colorways look like knit up, which was so helpful, especially because like one of the color combinations I was looking at this colorway, and I was looking at Rainbow Sherbet, I think was the other one, which in the skein looked like sort of a overall combination of different colors that I would really love all together. And then seeing it knit up, realized like, oh, it reads very pink. Like from a distance, this is like Barbie pink, which I love. Again, like turquoise, love looking at this, but I know that it's not a color that I'm gonna be super excited to wear all the time. And I thought that I liked this colorway less than that one, but when I saw the 2 samples, I was like, oh no, this is actually the one that I want. The Wandering Flock also at the show debuted their new Cotton Lino line, which is a combo of 35% organic cotton, 30% mulberry silk, 20% linen, and 15% alpaca. So all natural fibers, but combined together into this really nice sort of like summery fiber. They only had it on solids, but they did have it in this really beautiful like citrine green color that I might have to knit like a tank top out of at some point. I again resisted this because I didn't want to create a big long queue for myself, but I could very much see myself knitting a tank top in that color in the future. We shall see. So I did buy 2 skeins of this. They're priced at $48 each. So my grand total was $108.48 Canadian, including tax, which is equivalent to $80 US. So like, is this pricey yarn? Absolutely. But so this is gonna be my first time knitting with the Wandering Flock. So I cannot say this from experience, but I think Aro has talked about this before on her channel, and based on their website, I get the sense that this is like very, very well hand-dyed yarn. So one of the things that they say is, this is a quote, "Each dye recipe is carefully tested and our hand-painted skeins have a reliably consistent appearance across dye lots. We hate jogging skeins, so with our yarn, you don't have to." And to me, assuming that's accurate, and I think that it is based on both what Aro has talked about and the fact that like looking at these on the shelf, I was like, oh, I should like look for like the two that I like the best. They all looked identical. So I think that that is accurate. So I think that in terms of the relatively high price tag on these, like that attention to detail is what you're paying for. And I'm really excited to see these knit up. So knowing that I now have these, this brings us to future plans, i.e. what am I gonna do with these, i.e. what were the patterns I was looking at going in. So there are two different patterns that I'm sort of considering for this, but one of them is like possibly sort of a modification / give me other recommendations situation. So the pattern that I'm looking at is called the 251-52 Lang Yarns Mohair Luxe by Lang Yarns Switzerland. Does it need a better name? Yes. So here are my reservations with this one. First of all, the size range. It's pretty limited. I could definitely knit something that would fit me, but I would much rather be knitting a pattern that is more inclusive. So that's kind of my first issue. And then my second issue is that I'm not sure if I actually want this like lacy stitch pattern in a yarn that is variegated like this. Like this sample is in a solid color, and I think that that works really beautifully for the lace pattern to show. And I'm just not sure that I would love the way that that shows off a variegated yarn, or that they kind of like fail to show off each other because they're kind of competing. So really, what do I like about this? Maybe that would be a helpful thing to talk about. I love the structure of the top of this garment. I love the neckline, the way that it sort of comes out at the shoulder. I think it's so like elegant and cute. I think I would probably knit it shorter than this. But so this brings me to my question is, do you know of a pattern that is akin to this one, but that like addresses those concerns that I have, that is more size inclusive, that maybe has a plainer stitch pattern that can still be knit in like mohair lace? If you have something that fits that bill, please let me know. I'm very curious. So that was a pattern that I was sort of shopping based off of. In terms of quantities, it was a thing where like one skein would probably be fine, but I did not want to be trapped with only one skein, playing yarn chicken and maybe running out. And like if I decided that this wasn't the pattern that I wanted to do, then I don't have enough to do anything else that I want to do. So I decided to get two to be on the safe side, which gives me a lot more options, which is helpful because when I was at the Wandering Flock booth, one of the people at the booth was wearing this very gauzy mohair top that I was like, oh my God, I love your top, it's beautiful. And she told me that it's the Cloud Bow top by Reed Keys. Now what's funny is that earlier in the day when I was doing my research, I did come across that pattern and I clicked on it. I was interested enough to like go look at the details, but it just didn't entirely fit the bill for me from the project photos. But seeing it like in real life on someone, I was like, oh, I like this top. And I think part of it is that in the sample photos, the pattern has both a dress version and a top version, but the top version is like striped. And I think that that was really sort of taking away from how I could envision this. And the dress didn't really help me to envision it better because the sort of peplum-y part looks very different on the dress than the top. So I just was struggling to imagine it as something I would want to wear. Then I saw someone wearing this top in, I don't think it was quite this colorway. It might have been the holographic one, maybe. I'm not sure, but it was stunning. And now I'm thinking that I might want to do that one. That might be the answer. So I'm curious to know still about the like short sleeve, the other pattern. But it's also possible that these are both things that I might end up making, and then that will be my excuse to go buy like a different fun variegated mohair, potentially. And critically, the Cloud Bow accommodates up to between a 62 and a 66 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease you want. So I love those numbers. I'm so much happier with those numbers than the one from the other top. So that makes me feel good about it too. And now the question is like, I was planning after I finish this cardigan to start working on the Fausta bralette, and now I'm like, or do I want to do that? Like this is why. This is why I don't buy backlogs of yarn, because now I have this weird, like, which one do I want to, I still need to use my Hedgehog Fibers yarn. Like now I feel like I am like juggling priorities in a way that I'm like, I just don't know. So if I had not been going to a yarn festival, I would absolutely not have been buying yarn right now. And now I need to kind of lie in the bed that I've made and figure out what I'm doing with all of these things. So wish me luck. Okay, so that's it for my knitting related stuff, but as you'll know if you've been here before, I like to take some time at the end of my videos to talk about other kind of like creative, interesty stuff, which basically always involves reading, sometimes involves writing, and today also involves paper marbling. Okay, so let's start off with books as usual. So this week I have both an acquisition and a finished object in books, and this is A Perfect Bowl of Pho by Nam Nguyen. So this is a book that like very serendipitously came into my life because I only know about it because Nam was on an episode of Jeopardy recently, and he stood out to me because he's a playwright from Toronto, and as someone from the Toronto area who absolutely loves theater, I was like, I need to Google him. And when I did, this is what comes up. And so I read the blurb for this and I was like, I need to read this immediately. So let me read it to you. Nam, the procrastination-prone Vietnamese Canadian university student, sets out with the vague ambition to write a musical about his diaspora as embodied by food, particularly the world-famous noodle soup pho. What follows is pure meta-musical, genre-bending through thousands of years of history, featuring rapping ancient kings, communist spies, dancing sharks and refugees, and awkward first dates in suburbia. However, Nam eventually finds himself caught between his different characters as each argues what pho, the food and the show, truly represents, and he struggles to find an answer that will satisfy everyone. In the end, isn't this just a bunch of silly soup songs? And what a delight that sounds like, and what a delight it was. I laughed out loud so many times reading this and like desperately want to see it as a show. Like I'm now following him on Instagram in hopes of like being aware next time this is staged somewhere. But I'm also so glad that I read it, because there's so much comedy in like the footnotes and just the like stage directions, like all these things that are like really only there for someone putting on the show, but like also hilarious. And at the same time, like, yes, it's really hilarious and a lot of it is really like silly and lighthearted, but it also does, like the blurb alludes to, like it touches on a lot of history that like we don't get taught in school in Canada, which is ridiculous because a lot of this touches on the resettlement of Vietnamese refugees between 1975 and 1995, like in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. And Canada is the country that took in the most refugees per capita of anywhere. So this is a huge part of like our history as a country. Does this come up anywhere in our school? Absolutely not. And I knew a bit about this because I like personally have family who is here as a direct result of this. So this is not entirely new, but it was just such a fun way to like learn a little bit more history without at all feeling like you're being taught history. I always love reading books that reflect a very different life experience than the one that I've had. You know, I'm not the first generation child of a family of Vietnamese immigrants. Shocking. And it was just such a delight from start to finish. Like, it is silly songs about pho as promised. It's also questions of like culture and belonging and otherness and like all of these things. One of the other things that comes up in this book that's really fun is this idea of like, what does it mean for your writing to have to like have a really deep meaning? Like, okay, you're a really strong writer and this is really funny, but what's it about? You know, like what, like about in like a deep way. And like, as a person who took university creative writing classes and would get the feedback of like, your line writing is strong, but what's it about? What's the deeper meaning? I think you need to like find things to write about that are like deeper and like more important. I felt this in my soul, okay? I too have been traumatized by this question. So thank you, Nam, thank you. And I just loved it. And also, if you've never read a play, if this idea seems weird to you, I would recommend giving it a try if there's one that you're curious about, because some of my favorite reads have been plays. It's definitely a different reading experience than a book. You're not getting like a lot of description. You're not getting nearly as much of a vibe set in a sort of generous way, but it is amazing what a strong playwright can do with like some brief stage directions and director's notes, especially if you're a person who loves dialogue in a book. Like if you just love characters going back and forth for pages, may I present to you a play which is just entirely dialogue. Another play that I really loved reading is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which I read like a decade ago, and just a few weeks ago finally got to see a production of it in Toronto, and it was such a delight to finally see it performed after having read it. But I have loved that show for so long, and I've been able to love it for so long because I read it as a book. So recommend reading plays in general, particularly recommend reading this play. So good. I feel like I've been in a little bit of a reading slump lately. I've just been progressing slowly through books that are like not that long. But so when this arrived on my doorstep, because it's from like a pretty small press, and so it took like a few weeks to arrive. So one day it just suddenly appeared on my porch, and it happened to be a day where I had like several hours at the end of the day where I didn't have anything that I had to do. And I was like, I think I'm just gonna sit down and read a whole play today. Because that's the other thing about reading a play is like, the pages look like this, right? Like it's not dense. It's mostly dialogue. it reads quickly. Like, if you think about it, it can't take longer to read than the length of a show that a person is willing to sit through. So in the middle of my reading slump, I just busted through this in one evening and had a great time. In terms of reading whips, I'm still working on Kitchen Confidential, though I am further into it now. And it continues to be like, what is happening in kitchens? Like, if you're unfamiliar, the premise of this is Anthony Bourdain is basically being like, here's what it's like behind the scenes in a restaurant kitchen and like in that industry and in that world, for better and for worse. And there's like a lot of wild things going on in kitchens. I mean, this was written, I think, in the 90s, and he has even said, I think in some of his updated annotations, because why can't I find any of them? This edition has like his own annotated scribbles on it that he did for this later edition. And he has said, you know what, I think that a lot of this is starting to change. Because, you know, like some of the things in this book are like how newbie chefs are like harassed and assaulted by the more experienced chefs. So, you know, like fingers crossed that he's right and that has indeed improved, because no thanks. In the pages since my last update, I have been personally accosted by Anthony Bourdain for several of my own kitchen habits, because I am not a cook. I make food to keep myself alive, and that's about it. That's the bare minimum. So I've been scolded for my minced and peeled garlic that floats inside the little oil that he's like, this is disgusting. I have been scolded for having margarine in my fridge. In my defense, I do also have butter. I just margarine is just better for some things, okay? Don't come for me. So I got a great lecture on that. Very much enjoyed him tearing me to shreds. He has also attacked me for liking brunch, because apparently no like self-respecting chef likes brunch. So I'm excited to see what he rips me apart for next. Okay, and then as far as book acquisitions, this is proving to be perhaps the most consistent segment on my entire channel, which is that if nothing else has happened, I have bought a book. And this book that I bought this time is Attached at the Hip by Christine Riccio. And so Christine is someone who I have followed on YouTube for like probably half my life at this point. Like, she was a pretty OG booktuber. She's since become an author. This is her third, I think, novel. I read her other two as well, enjoyed them, and I was so excited to check out her writing for the first time, because our reading interests really overlap, specifically when she's talking about contemporary fiction. She also reads quite a bit of fantasy, which is just not my thing, but anytime I've picked up a contemporary book that she's recommended, I have loved it. So I was like, okay, I feel like the odds of me liking your writing are good. I, in fact, have enjoyed her writing, and this one I'm excited about, because this one was like written for me. Because this book is a romance that is based on basically a fictional version of the show Survivor, where there's also like a dating element to it. Now, as someone who loves Survivor, and even more than Survivor, loves the Bachelor franchise, I cannot even tell you how like deep in the pit of Bachelor lore that I am. It is a deeply flawed and troubled show, and I can never stop watching it. So I just feel like this book was written specifically for me. So thank you, Christine. And I have to say that the degree to which this was written specifically for me was so potent and so clear that I did pre-order it. And apparently I did that 2 times because 2 copies arrived. The second time, the most recent time that I pre-ordered it, I even went back and looked at my order history, because I couldn't remember if I'd pre-ordered it. And like thought that I had checked all my recent orders, thought that it wasn't on there, and yet 2 books arrived in separate packages, and I was charged for both of them. So I think I need to make a trip to the bookstore and make a return, or if I'm too lazy to do that, it will just end up in the little free library on my street. But I'm just very excited to get into this one. It's just going to be such a good, fun, like summery read. I haven't really read a good like summery book yet this year, so it's time. And now for a new featured project situation in this other creative stuff segment, paper marbling. So I mentioned in my last video that my nephew Chase was going to be coming to visit me, and Chase loves a good craft project, and he also just loves understanding like how new things work and just sort of getting to know a process and figuring it all out. And I was thinking that he might really like paper marbling. Now, paper marbling, if you're unfamiliar, actually, let me grab you a book to show this. Okay, so this is a very old edition of the book Candide by Voltaire, which I love. This is like one of the only books that I ever had to read for school in French class that I actually enjoyed. Le Petit Prince is the other one. Everything else that they make you read in French class in Canada is like, oh, The Phantom of the Opera was one, but aside from that, everything else is like Canadian pastoral fiction. It's just people in the prairies being bored and depressed. Like, as far as the Ontario French curriculum would have you know, that is like the entirety of French Canadian literature. I'm sure there's other more interesting stuff out there, but I do not know what it is. But in this edition of Voltaire, it has these very classic end papers that you'll see in a lot of old books with these kind of fun, swirly, marbly patterns. And this is done through the process of paper marbling. So this is the thing that Chase and I were working on. Now, this is something that I did almost a decade ago, which makes me feel older than I feel like I am. But for my last year in university, I had to do like a big thesis design project, and it was a whole very complicated thing, but part of it was that I was making books, and as part of the concept of the thesis, I needed to feel like a very sort of like quintessential, prototypical, like traditional book. And paper marbling is such a recognizable characteristic of old books. So I decided that I wanted to try that out and learn how to do it so that I could use it as part of my cover designs. So I had done this before, but I haven't done it since. It's one of those things that like, it's a lot of fun to do, but it requires like a decent amount of setup. So it's not something that like, you know, I'm just gonna like casually bust out to do on like a random day. And because of that, without having like a particular like deadline or impetus to do it, it's just the kind of thing that I like never get around to doing. So at some point in between, I'd gotten rid of all my marbling supplies, and then Chase was coming over for the weekend, and I was like, sounds like a good excuse to buy some art supplies. So I bought stuff for paper marbling, and basically the way the technique works is that you start with sort of a big tray full of water, and then the one kind of special material that you really, really need to be able to do this process is you need some form of marbling base, which is something that you mix in the water to make it kind of gooey. Like not jello, but it has to be like kind of thick and like slimy drippy. And there's a couple different kinds of marble base. This used to be done with a powder derived from, it's actually like it's an algae. So this is what was used, you know, hundreds of years ago. This algae goop was mixed with water to give it this thicker consistency. So now you can buy powdered versions of that. And you can also buy more contemporary marbling formulations that don't use algae, but accomplish the same thing. So that's the one thing you like really, really need. And then by having this weird, like thick water, what it allows you to do is like eyedropper little drops of ink on top of the water. And because the water is so heavy, the ink floats on top of it. It doesn't mix in. And this means that you can then use tools to like swirl it around and kind of create different patterns. And there's a lot of specific, more traditional marbling techniques that create very specific looks that you would recognize as sort of like common marbling techniques, but you can also just totally freehand it and do whatever you want. And so in doing the ink part, I have seen people DIY that using just like watered down acrylic paints that they happen to have at home. So that's something that you could like play around with, and with a little bit of trial and error could probably figure it out. I will actually link to a video that I found that kind of gives an overview of this whole process. And in that video, he is just using like regular paint. He didn't buy anything special. So I'll direct you there if this is something that you're curious about. I'll pop a link in the description if that's something that you're interested in. I decided to buy dedicated marbling inks just because that's what I had used the last time that I did it. I knew that it worked well, and because I really wanted this project to work for us on the day that we were doing it. Chase was only here for a weekend, so I didn't want to spend the whole time like troubleshooting and trying to figure out why this wasn't working. Like I just wanted it to be fun. So I went and I bought the stuff that I knew would work. I ordered it online from a little shop in Toronto called G&S Dye, which is the same place that I got the stuff last time. It happens to be right around the corner from OCAD, which is where I went to university and where I was doing my thesis. So it was all very convenient at the time. Also, I say happens to be, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's right by the art school. I think that is very much where their demographic is. So that makes a lot of sense. But so they do ship. So if you're not in Toronto and can't get there, that is a place that you can get it from. I'm sure you can get it lots of other places as well. But so with the marbling process, once you have your design created on the surface of the water, all you do is like lay your piece of paper down onto the surface, and it just magically like picks up everything from the surface of the water. And now it's on your paper, and it's so cool. So let me show you some of what we made. So I only have some of them because Chase took home a bunch of his, and you know, some of mine that he stole. But so like this is one of the like sort of traditional marbling motifs that you might recognize. Like you've probably seen this style somewhere on the inside of a book, these sort of scallopy shapes. Here's another kind of variation on that. With this one, I was combining red and magenta inks, so they're sort of close but different in color, which gives kind of a fun effect. This is kind of a more like gentle swirly one. Like just look how cool they are. So these pages have now all spent quite a bit of time in a paper press, because when you put the paper down to pick up the ink, it becomes soaking wet and then has to like hang on the drying rack. So these were all like in this shape when they were done, so they've had to be flattened out. Here is another design that we did, and I am really excited to use these for scrapbook paper. I feel like these are going to be really fun as backgrounds to my scrapbook pages. One of the things that's really fun about marbling is you kind of like, you don't know exactly what you're gonna get. You know, ink will kind of like disperse differently at different times. There was definitely our first few sheets, I think you have to get over a bit of a like thinking you know what you're creating and then it doesn't turn out that way and you're like, oh, that's not what I thought. But once you kind of get into the experimental mode of it, it becomes really fun. And actually some of our favorite pages are ones that were complete and total accidents, because after you have your paper pick up the ink on the surface, there's always some left over in the tray. So to not muck up your next one that you're doing, you want to just use some scrap paper to pick up the excess. And sometimes you get things that look like this. Like it looks like the inside of like a gemstone or something. And they're so cool. Like these ones were all things that were not created on purpose. Like, look at how cool this is. This was not created on purpose, but look at how cool it is. So marbling is a ton of fun, highly recommend. Also, I would say it doesn't have to be as much prep as I did, because one of the materials that you will see recommended to buy in this process is a powder called alum that you mix in with water and then use this to coat your paper in advance of printing on it. And this is supposed to help it pick up the color better. So you coat the paper with this, you then let that dry, and then you use that to print on after it's dry. But then at some point we tried using paper that was not coated with that, and we did not notice a difference in the quality that it was picking up. And coating this paper in advance was like a huge part of the setup work that I had to do for this. So like, honestly, I'm sure that at like a professional level of paper marbling, this does something. But if you just think this sounds fun and want to try it, you can skip the alum step. It's fine. So this video shows you all of the pages that I kept. These are mostly ones that I made. It's the occasional one also that Chase made and basically traded me for, i.e. he forcibly stole some of mine and gave me these as a consolation prize. And then this is Chase's collection that he took home. So we only spent probably like 2 hours in total doing this, and as you can see, we were greatly prolific. So paper marbling is a thing where you can just mess around a little bit and make a lot of very cool things very quickly. So it's just a lot of fun. So if you like crafty projects, I would recommend checking it out. It just kind of makes you feel like you're way more skilled at something than you actually are. It feels like something you should have to like really know what you're doing to create something this way, and you really don't. And it's great. Okay, so that's everything I've got to talk about today. So thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. I really appreciate you being here. If you'd like to be here next time, I would love it if you subscribed. If you're already subscribed, you're my favorite. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye.